Warriors Live. I'm your host, Chase Brown, joined as always by 11 Warriors Deputy Editor Dan Hope and 11 Warriors reporter Andy Anders. This is our recap edition of 11 Warriors Live for Ohio State's win over Washington on Saturday. It was a 24-6 win in favor of the Buckeyes. Dan and Andy were out on the West Coast for this game. Guys, how was your experience traveling all the way from Columbus to Seattle? Did you guys get into anything fun on Friday or Saturday night while you were there?
Yeah, I think it was a good trip out there for sure. We didn't have a ton of time to explore, but did get out there Friday night. Checked out the Pike Place Market. Had some good pizza at the Alibi Room. So yeah, it was nice to see. Definitely a cool city, and hope to have another opportunity to get back out there in the future and explore it more.
It looked like the environment, just from watching the game, from the different aerial shots that CBS was giving fans, that environment is one of a kind. With the sailgating, I think that's what they called it, or maybe that's just what I made it up in my head, with the boats on the lake there surrounding the stadium. The stadium itself looks beautiful. It was packed. It seemed like it was a really great environment. Andy, how would you rate it on your experience as you went out there to see Ohio State play Washington in a sea of purple?
Yeah, there'd only been two stadiums I'd been to previous to this that I felt like were louder than the shoe, and this was the third one. It's built perfectly to amplify noise, and I really love loud college football environments. So you start there. However, it was a good 30% Ohio State fans in the crowd. Buckeye
It looked
Nation
like it.
traveled really well for this game, so that did dampen the sound a little bit, but still, it's the fact that most of the stadium is metal and it's built on top of itself. So it really contains and amplifies and resonates the noise super well. And you could even tell when the band was warming up a couple hours before kickoff, before anyone was even in the stadium. It was just the band sound was so loud. So how it's constructed, I've seen some people say they were piping in noise. I didn't get that vibe at all. I just think it's a really well constructed stadium, but especially so because the views are amazing. Like you look out from the press box, you can see like across the lake, like you said, the sailgating, that is what they call it. But there's like some towns you can see on the shores of the lake, and there's mountains off in the distance. There's a window in the back of the press box where you could see Mount Rainier. And like when I saw it, it was like cresting through the clouds, like it was like breaking the cloud line at its peak. So that was really cool. And apparently, the opposite side of the stadium from the press box, they can just look out and see it on that opposite side. Someone who works there told me. So overall, I would put it top five favorite stadiums I've ever been to. Maybe top three. It
You
was
said you
that
said it was
gorgeous.
three. What were the first two? I had to ask you. That kind of piqued my interest at the beginning. Where does it
Rose Bowl
rank
will
behind?
always be number one.
Oh, okay. Of
Uh,
course, of course.
Rose Bowl will always be number one, but that's well, I said loud, like top three loudest. The other
Yeah.
two loudest were Beaver and Memorial, Nebraska's stadium. Um, Penn State Stadium gets super loud, like that. It's so like they always pack the student section, and it's just also pretty well constructed for noise, even though it's old. And like it starts bouncing when it gets really loud. The press box will start moving up and down. It feels weird under your feet, but yeah, you go to a whiteout at Penn State, like that's the loudest atmosphere. I was there in 2018. That's the loudest I've ever heard any stadium. Even though Ohio State won that game. So, having said that, like I said, top five favorite stadium I've been to, and I would put it top three loudest. Um, just really constructed well for that, and the scenery was immaculate.
Ohio State entered into that environment, one of Andy's favorites. I don't know if it ranks among Dan's tops. I'm assuming it does. But Ohio State goes into that stadium and wins 24-6. We'll talk
I will
about
say this. It's a cool stadium, but I don't know if you have a picture to show everybody. In the press box, I'm not trying to complain, but I had like two TVs like right in front of me the whole game, but I was looking around. So just to be honest, like I don't think I fully appreciated it as much as probably other people
Sure.
did because I was kind of going like this the whole game, trying to see the field. So like to me, it was not on the same level as like Autzen last year. I think
Yeah.
that being a night game too last year when Ohio State played at Oregon also had something to do with that. Also, the fact that frankly, I think the Oregon game, it was like 90% Oregon fans, whereas It was more like 70-30 in this game. And honestly, at times it felt like it might have just been where we were sitting because a lot of them were in front of us. But at times it felt like the Ohio State fans were louder than the Washington fans. So I think it was a cool stadium, but just to be honest, like because of where they put me in the press box, they didn't really allow me to like fully appreciate it. So that dings it a little bit in my eyes.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think we need to send this recording, this live stream to Washington's SID to let them know for our next trip out there. Well, let's get into some X's and O's. Let's talk about Ohio State's defense, which had a great performance, Ohio State's offense, which came on strong later in the game. Before we do that, though, I do want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this show, which is First Bank of Central Ohio. It's the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners of Central Ohio. It's locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. First Bank of Ohio. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. I also want to give a shout out to the 11 Dubgate, which is going to be this weekend before Ohio State takes on Minnesota. A few hours before kickoff, we'll be located behind the varsity club, and there will be quite the tailgate experience for anyone that chooses to come there. I believe there's 50 pounds of pulled pork that's going to be at this tailgate, along with garage beer, Sun Cruisers, plenty of other drinks. It's going to be quite the time. We would love to see you guys there. I'm sure the three of us will probably roll up at some point, and there'll be plenty of 11 Warriors staffers and those who are close to the company hanging out. But let's talk X's and O's. Okay, Ohio State's defense, it's historically good. I think you can say that with confidence. Through the first four games, it has been historically good. And I don't necessarily expect that trend to taper off anytime soon with the talent that it has, with its 11 starters and some of the depth and Matt Patricia calling the plays. Caden Curry was lights out on Saturday against Washington. He led the team with 11 tackles. He had a school record, 5 tackles for loss, tied a school record, and he had 3 sacks. He was just named the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week on Monday. He probably has a good chance to win a National Player of the Week award as well. But he wasn't alone in his effort, too. Caden McDonald played extremely well, 7 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. And then Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese behind him combined for 11 tackles. You guys are watching the Ohio State defense, maybe what did we say earlier? We said duck, dip, dodge, dive, all the things you were doing around those TVs in the press conference to try during the game to watch around Ohio State's defense. Dan, when you come away from that game, what is your primary takeaway of Ohio State's defense and how they performed against a Washington offense that we all thought would perform pretty well with Damon Williams Jr. and Jonah Coleman and Denzel Boston, guys like that?
Well, I don't know how it can be anything other than the fact that Ohio State has 2 studs on its defensive line, and those 2 studs are Caden Curry and Caden McDonald. I mean, we've already been talking them up the last few weeks, but the performances that they had out in Seattle were unbelievable. I mean, Caden Curry's numbers are eye-popping. 11 tackles. That's the most in a game for an Ohio State defensive lineman since Cam Hayward, way back when he was playing at Ohio State in 2009. That's the most tackles a defensive lineman has had in a game for Ohio State since then. His 5 tackles for loss tied an Ohio State school record, 3 sacks. I mean, you look at his numbers, he's top 5 in the country now in sacks. He's been one of the best defensive lineman in the entire country. He could be tracking toward an All-American season. He's leading the team in sacks right now as a defensive end, which is not something you typically see. And right behind him in total tackles is Caden McDonald, a nose tackle. I mean, you can be a great nose tackle and have like 20 tackles in a season. He already has more than that in 4 games. I mean, the amount of production they're getting out of that position from Caden McDonald. I think he had 7 tackles, 3 TFLs, 2 sacks in this game against Washington. I mean, I sit here and I don't want to overreact too early in the season, but you think about how good that defensive line was last year. And these guys might be better than the guys that they lost last year. Like, I mean, Caden McDonald, I was talking about with Andy. I think Jonathan Hankins is probably the last nose tackle Ohio State had who's been this consistently disruptive. I mean, they've had other good nose tackles, guys like, Ty Hamilton the last couple years, Adolphus Washington, but a guy who's just constantly not just plugging gaps, filling up blocks, and allowing guys around him to make plays, but actually making plays himself consistently. It's been a while since we've seen a true nose tackle make that kind of impact for Ohio State. And I think Caden McDonald is trending toward being a first-round NFL draft pick with how well he's playing right now. And then Caden Curry is a guy, he waited his turn the last few years behind Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. And, I think you kind of wondered, like, is he ever going to be more than just a role player or rotational guy for Ohio State? I mean, even going into this year, when Ohio State brought in Bo Atkinson, it's like, does that mean Caden Curry's not going to be a starter after waiting his turn for the last few years? And now, I mean, he's the clear star of this defensive end group for all the preseason hype that surrounded Kenyatta Jackson and all the talk about him being this breakout star on the defensive line. It's actually Caden Curry who's become the breakout star at defensive end and is playing at a phenomenal level. And so what we've seen from those two guys through 4 games has been a revelation. And the idea coming into the season that Ohio State's defensive line could be the weakness of its defense, that's not proving to be the case. And a lot of it is because of how great those two guys have been.
Andy, talk to me a little bit about Caden Curry and his performance in this game. A little bit more in particular on Curry. You wrote an article about him going into this week, and the motor and the energy and the intensity that he brings to Ohio State's defense. What about him in particular has allowed him to emerge as one of Ohio State's consistent contributors in the defense at large, but also the leading contributor on Ohio State's defensive line room?
It's exactly what you said first off, that motor. I mean, it's an overused term in football often. I probably overuse it, even though I acknowledge it's overused. But he's so relentless. Like, I think as impressive as the sacks and the TFLs were, they were amazing. The other thing I want to talk about was he was making plays all over, like sideline to sideline, running the field. We saw him tackle. It was like a 2 or 3 yard gain. He tackled someone after they caught a pass. He like chases down plays and makes tackles from behind. He does things that you don't normally see defensive linemen do because of A, that motor, B, athleticism. Like coming in, Caden Curry was seen as this tweener athlete that could either be a defensive tackle, 3 technique defensive tackle, or defensive end in college. And we've seen the full realization of that this season. The number of different ways they're using him. He got sacks from both the interior rush and the exterior rush as a defensive end in this game. It's Matt Patricia has moved him around in that way as a chess piece. I loved too just taking a video of him coming off the field and his eye black was all over his face. I mean, it was like above the eyebrows, all over the cheeks, all over the chin. And I asked him about it after the game. He says like he normally just does a cross on one side and a circle on the other, which is supposed to be a ring. His goal for this year to get another ring. Um, so to know that it's that little bit and he wears it all over his face by the end, that's just like it makes you think of war paint. The comparison that I would make is honestly a hero from my childhood, which is John Simon. People might remember that he was one of the stars of the 2012 team that went 12-0 in the regular season, had the same relentless motor, but I think Curry is honestly more athletic than Simon was. And just again, that ability to run sideline to sideline, play different positions, be involved. And he was rewarded, that versatility rewards him with the highest snap count among the defensive linemen, as we saw on Dan's snap count piece the other day. So those are the things that have enabled this from Curry, and we've seen it through 4 games. I mean, he was their best defensive lineman in the Ohio game too. He's emerged as an anchor, and maybe even as much as I love Jack Sawyer, as good as JT Tuimoloau's was, I don't want to take anything away from those guys. He might be at this rate the best defensive lineman, the best defensive end at least they've had since Chase Young. I'll put that out there.
I like the John Simon comparison because I think it's always got to be, if you're a good white defensive end at Ohio State now, it's got to be the next Bosa. Right? It's always got to be Bosa's. But I mean, both Bosa brothers were top 5 NFL draft picks. Like that's a high bar. Caden Curry's playing at a phenomenal level, but it's still that's a lofty bar to compare to. But I think that John Simon comparison is a good one. I agree. I think there's definitely, like you said, I think Caden's a little bit quicker than John Simon was, but I do think there's a lot of similarities to their games, especially, John Simon was a guy you could kind of move around, rush him inside as well. And we've seen that scenario where Kayden's been very effective.
Is Sam Hubbard a good comparison too? That might be the best question for Andy, being a Cincinnati Bengals fan. But I always feel like the Bosa comparison, you're right, Dan, is the one that we always jump to. But I don't think that's necessarily fair in all cases. Just similarly to how we would always compare the next great defensive end to Chase Young too. Like those are some pretty lofty comparisons. But is a guy like Sam Hubbard someone that might be a good comparison for him too?
It's not a bad one. I think Hubbard's specialty is and was, well, I guess he's retired now, was run defense. He was literally the best run defending defensive end in the NFL some years. Like he was fantastic at that, not as gifted as a pass rusher, just pure speed, get off the field. I think Curry's game is a little more balanced than that. Like we've seen the Zach production through 4 games, and Hubbard was good getting after the quarterback more at Ohio State in college than he was in the NFL. And again, he was specialty run defender, and that's very valuable to a team. I never want to take away. Like a lot of people are going to look at the sack numbers and define a defensive end that way. Run defense is still very, very important for that position, almost as important as that. So Hubbard was a really good defensive end, but I think there's a little more balance to Curry's game. They were both supreme athletes. I think Hubbard had a lot of that versatility too. They could bring him inside a little bit. So there's definitely similarities there. But to me, I think John Simon is a little more. That's who comes to mind for me a little more.
I think Jack Sawyer, in my mind, was more similar to Sam Hubbard than Caden Curry is.
Yeah. Dan, I want to ask you this question as being the longest tenured reporter on the Ohio State beat among us three. I am kind of curious what you would make of, and Andy, could feel free to chime into this as well. It seemed like Ohio State's defensive ends, in particular, under Jim Knowles, were not unleashed as frequently as maybe we were used to in the past when Larry Johnson kind of gained his reputation as being the best defensive line coach in college football. Then Jim Knowles shows up. They have the least private beef ever. Everyone knew that they disagreed with each other on almost everything. And it wasn't until the Oregon game last year that Ohio State really let those guys rip. And throughout the college football playoff, JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer were difference makers in every single game, leading to an Ohio State national championship. Now Matt Patricia shows up, and it seems like he's willing, and I don't want to give too much credit where maybe it doesn't deserve to go, but I think you can make the assumption that Larry Johnson has free creative control with what he wants to do with his defensive line room. It seems that Larry Johnson is back in that rhythm of letting his guys go and play. They're making as many plays in their assignments as Larry Johnson is giving them, but they're also just being disruptors. As Dan mentioned earlier, Caden McDonald is not your traditional nose tackle that's creating lanes for your linebackers to come downhill and make plays in the gap. He's just making them on his own. And it seems like these guys have the freedom and the comfortability and the confidence to go out and make plays. Is that the kind of the right assumption? Am I viewing that right, Dan? Would you maybe say that there's something there about the way that maybe Jim Knowles had treated those defensive ends in the time that he was here as defensive coordinator, and now you're seeing Matt Patricia kind of work in tandem with Larry Johnson?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I do think you're right that it does seem like they're attacking a little bit more freely now than maybe we saw with Jack and JT until the end of last season. I think the thing is interesting though is you've got two guys there in Kayden and Kayden who are both racking up a ton of stats. We're not really seeing a ton of that from the rest of the defensive line. So I wonder somewhat like how much of that is assignment based? Like how much are the plays designed for those two to be the ones that are attacking and making a lot of plays? Or is it just that they're better and they're just winning their assignments more consistently than the other guys on the line? Because I think Kenyatta Jackson's still a guy that like we probably all expect a little more production from than we've seen. I don't think he played poorly by any means against Washington. He was part of that effort as well. But we've seen the numbers for Caden Curry and Kayden McDonald. So far, they haven't come for Kenyatta Jackson. Now, I think at that 3 technique spot, it's a little bit of a different story because I think for whatever reason, things don't quite seem to be clicking the way they're supposed to be for Edric Houston. And we've seen now 2 games in a row, he has not started, played only 11 snaps against Washington. We know that he suffered the injury in the preseason. Maybe he's not fully healthy. I know some people are saying he had a wrap on his ankle, as well as, that knee injury that he suffered in the preseason. But, also had a really bad unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that, gave Washington a first down after what would have been a third down. It was a sack by Caden Curry. It still counts as a sack, but it would have gotten Ohio State off the field on third down. Instead gave Washington another first down. And so that three-tech spot is still kind of like the question mark spot on the line. I think Taiwan Malone has been solid, but not, he's not making a ton of like impact plays. I think he's doing his job, but we're not really seeing, again, that same kind of production from him that we're seeing from Kayden and Kayden. So I'm going to be interested to see as the season progresses, do we see whether it's Kenyatta, Taiwan, Edric, Bo Atkinson? Do we see more of those guys flash and make more big plays, or does it continue to be the Kayden and Kayden show all year long?
Well, Andy, let me ask that question in a more particular way for you, because Andy and I off air were talking about some of the ways that Ohio State is using Arvell Reese and Caleb Downs. Is it something as simple as Caleb Downs is on that side of the field, Arvell Reese is on that side of the field, I'm the offensive coordinator, I don't want to go in those directions, so I'm going to go the other way. And I'm going to go right at Caden Curry, right at Caden McDonald, and those guys are the ones that are benefiting the most from those 2 guys being first-round NFL draft talents that opposing offensive coordinators, they simply just don't want to go that direction. I will say there was a moment in the game too. I'm sorry, I'm making this a longer question than I meant to be, but for Dan's point about Kenyatta Jackson, there was a point where the play was supposed to go the opposite direction of Kenyatta Jackson on Saturday, and he sat in the same spot for about 3 seconds. So responsible in the role that he was asked to do. Waited. All of a sudden, Damon Williams Jr. turns his direction. Kenyatta Jackson still standing there like a brick wall. Gets a sack or a tackle for loss in the back, or at least leads to another tackle for loss for maybe Caden McDonald or Caden Curry. Those guys had so many of them. So do you think there's something there as well with the way that Ohio State is using Caleb Downs and Arvell Reese and deploying them in different areas of the field, that maybe Curry and McDonald are the ones benefiting the most from their impact?
Yeah, first off, on that play in particular, as a defensive lineman, you learn, I was taught it's called BCRS. When you're on the backside of a play that's going away from you, and particularly if you're unblocked, you don't want to just crash down the line like that until you know the running back has gotten the ball or something of that nature, because the BCRS stands for boot, counter, reverse, screen. Like, the play can still come back to you even if it's still looking like it's going to go away. So good assignment, sound football from Kenyatta there. He's rewarded with a sack. That's good play. As far as I don't have a good sense on whether teams are running one direction or another to maybe avoid Arvell Reese and Caleb Downs. I think there's killers all over this defense for Ohio State right now. I don't think teams are particularly eager to run at Sonny Styles either, or wherever Cade McDonald's at, that might be an urge to try and attack the 3 technique position that's been a little softer for Ohio State if you're looking at matchups like that. But I do want to backtrack a little bit because I have several thoughts on the defensive fronts and kind of that question you asked to Dan earlier. What's been really interesting is that there was all this narrative for years about Jim and Larry disagreeing, and Larry wanted to stick to the traditional 4 down front, and he was kind of not moving from that point, and Jim wanted to mix things up more with the jack position, blah, 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 blah. But Matt Patricia comes in, and all of a sudden, Larry, game 1, they're out there running the penny front with 3 down linemen and 2 stand-ups on the end. They're running 3-2-6s all the time, and that's continued. And what I think is interesting is, you look back at that 2022 season, it was the worst of Jack Sawyer's career because he was playing the jack all year, and it didn't fit his skill set. So the next 2 years, you have these 2 5-star studs at defensive end. They're best with a hand in the dirt. You run them in a 4 down front. And now I think Larry has realized he has a different set of talents this year. Caden Curry can do all these different things. CJ Hicks now he hasn't gotten involved too much, but he can be that stand-up guy. The talent that's there in Arvell, and he can rush off the edge and do these different things. I think Larry has been more malleable than people maybe gave him credit for, than I gave him credit for in the Jim Knowles days. And maybe it was just sage to you have these two stud defensive ends, put them on the line and let them go. But overall, this back seven does allow you to do so much creatively. And the way Jim Knowles has used this back seven, right? When you can spy Arvell Reese, you don't have to worry about caging the pocket anymore. We saw it. This is one of the fastest, most mobile quarterbacks in the country. Damon Williams had 0 games at less than 64 rushing yards entering this one. He ends up with negative rushing yards. That first play, he tries to take off and scramble. He jukes left, he jukes right. Arvell doesn't get shaken. He just runs him out, takes him down. Nope, going nowhere. And I like when you have that luxury at linebacker of guys that can just the answer is just spy Arvell Reese and the quarterback's not doing anything. Yeah. You can let the defensive linemen go upfield and be free rushers. Like they don't have to be as responsible caging the pocket. They can play with their hair on fire a little more. Also, the disguise in the back end, what Caleb Downs allows you to do. Like we heard Jim Knowles talk for years about disguise, and they used it a little more in the back half of 2024, and it enabled some of their best defense, but not to the level they're doing it right now with Matt Patricia, where they're constantly rolling guys. And you can see the confusion where Arch Manning and Damon Williams are holding the ball so long in the pocket because they don't know what they're seeing. The picture isn't clear. That's also allowing you to get home more often. Like coverage and rush work together. Jim Knowles said that for years. Matt Patricia. And I don't want to take anything away from Jim Knowles because he took what was a really, really bad shape defense after the Kerry Combs era and transformed it into one of the best in the country. But I feel like Patricia has raised it to another level in terms of how he uses the great weapons at his disposal. So this back seven in many ways is enabling what the front four is doing. And because they're closest to the ball now, they're the ones racking up all the stats and getting all the numbers. But it's still fueled by the talent, the speed, the football IQ, especially like Arvell Reese. He's such a smart player too, and he's soft spoken in interviews. He keeps things concise in his answers. He doesn't give a whole lot in interviews, so he doesn't always give that off in his interviews. But he is such a smart football player, the same way Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles are. The various things this back seven is doing and the athletes they have there is enabling what this front four has done so far.
I think to add to the point too of like how everybody's working together, like I look at right now, like I think this defense has 8 star players already. Like I think Caden Curry, Caden McDonald up front, linebacker you have Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese, corner you've got Davison Igbenos and Jermaine Matthews Jr., safety you've got Caleb Downs, Jalen McClain. I think all 8 of those guys have played at an elite level so far this year, and you take a defense that lost 8 NFL draft picks from last year, and like those are 8 guys. I think like right now, if they were in the NFL draft, they'd all be NFL draft picks. I think still want to see more out of Kenyatta Jackson, as we talked about before, that defensive end rotation in general. That free tech spot, still a bit of a question mark. Nickel, still a bit of a question mark. Still want to see a little more out of Lorenzo Styles Jr. But I think like that core group of 8 guys, like we already knew that Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles and Davison Igbenos were those kind of players. But I think Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, Arvell Reese, Jermaine Matthews, Jalen McClain, they've all established themselves as that level of players. And so, you look at this defense just as a whole now, it's like at every level, you've got players that are playing at an elite level. And that's why Ohio State's number 1 in the country right now in points allowed per game.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. This is a hat tip to Brian Walton on X. These numbers will also be in the school session tomorrow, a shameless plug for that. But this is where Ohio State ranks through 4 games and through 5 weeks of the college football season. They're number 1 in scoring defense, number 1 in total touchdowns, number 1 in touchdowns allowed per game, number 1 in opponent red zone scoring percentage and touchdown percentage, number 1 in rushing touchdowns allowed. So that's 6 things right there, right off the bat, maybe 7 that are Ohio State ranked number 1 in the nation defensively. Then you go on, rattle off a few more. Number 3 in opponent opponent long scrimmage yards of plays of 10 yards or more and 20 yards or more for rushing plays. They're number 4 in opponent total first downs, number 4 in opponent third down conversion percentage, number 5 in opponent passing plays of over 10 yards, number 5 in total yards allowed, number 6 in opponent first downs per game, number 7 in passing touchdowns allowed, number 8 in total defense, total yards allowed per play, total plays, passing defense, and then they rank number 12 in sacks per game. I don't know the number of things that I just read off, but that's probably somewhere between 12 and 15 things that Ohio State's defense ranks around the top 10 in the nation, and in some cases, top 5, in some cases, number 1 overall. I made the claim earlier, but I'm curious to what you guys think. Through 4 weeks, we can confidently say Ohio State's defense has been historically good. Dan, do you think that this defense, with 8 more games left on the schedule, when we look back on this season and the 12 regular season games that Ohio State plays, will this be one of the historically good Ohio State defenses?
It's certainly showing that potential. I mean, like you said, it's early in the season, and I mean, Ohio State's had some great defenses over the years. You don't have to look back very far. They had one just this past year, so to already put it in that conversation, it feels like a big step. But I mean, the way they're playing right now, you certainly feel like that's what this defense is going to end up being. It's going to end up being one of the great defenses that Ohio State's ever had, because again, like just talked about, the amount of talent they have at all 3 levels of this defense, the way they're playing right now, and I know we've had some talks about it among our staff. Like, you look at the schedule coming up, it's like you feel like they already conquered Texas and Washington. Like, you look at like the next schedule of games, like Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin. Like, if the first 4 teams couldn't score in double digits, are those teams going to be able to? Like, I mean, you probably look at like Penn State being like the next like big test on the schedule for the defense, and so you feel like things are set up for this defense to keep rolling. Now, again, I mean, it is, like you said, it is still early. Matt Patricia's a first-year coordinator at the collegiate level. Like, teams didn't really have any tape to study of a Matt Patricia defense before now. So as the year goes on, opposing offenses might figure out some things. Matt Patricia is going to have to continue adding more to his toolbox, continue to change things up. But I mean, so far, I mean, all signs point toward, this, quite possibly Ohio State having the best defense in the country again 2 years in a row.
And Andy, I would love to get to you, but I'm sure you're also going to write a few hundred words about this defense in your stock up, stock down piece for Tuesday. So I'll plug that to let our audience get to that point. But I do want to ask you, Andy, just to kick this conversation to the offense. Ohio State had some standout performers against Washington. Julian Sand completed 22 of 28 passes for a little bit over 200 yards and 2 scores. Bo Jackson led the Ohio State running back room per Dan's snap counts piece that came out on Monday morning, led the Ohio State running back room in snaps. He had 17 carries and 80 yards. And then Jeremiah Smith is an alien. That's what C.J. Donaldson called him in the postgame press conference. That alien gave him some juice with 8 catches on 9 targets for 81 yards and a touchdown. But I want to ask you this, Andy. What took so long for Ohio State's offense to get going? It seemed like there was maybe a little bit of conservative play calling. You could maybe call it that, but maybe it was something different. Was this just an Ohio State game plan that maybe led to there not being as many explosive plays to start the game, or was there something else going on for the Buckeyes?
Well, I think the thing going on was they didn't have the ball very many times. They had 3 first-half possessions, and you look at it, and they drove right down the field after the defense gets a stop. I think it was a 3-and-out to start the game. Drove right down the field. You get to the 5. C.J. Donaldson said it after the game. I said, we all said it. Your power box got to be able to fall forward for a yard on 4th and 1. When he gets to the line of scrimmage, I know it was good defensive play. They need him there. But you got to lower the pads and pick it up. And CJ said that himself after the game. So you have that stop there on 4th down. Then Brandon Ennis fumbles on a punt return when they were going to be set up inside the 25-yard line. They don't see the ball again forever. They finally get it back. They do have a punt. They have to punt it in the next drive. But they scored every single possession from there, except the last one of the game when they were just running out the clock and taking the W. It was a very slow, methodical game plan. They were taking the play clock consistently down to the last 10 seconds. It was just plodding, and it felt slow. Felt like they got off to that slow start because to me, they just didn't touch the ball very often. It was um, efficient offense where I think it's funny, like people talk about trestle ball and loving that style of relying on your defense and playing complementary football and running the ball and doing these things. But then when Ryan Day does it, all of a sudden, oh, the play calling's bad. Oh, this, oh, that. But they were like scoring on four out of your six drives that you were actually trying to score is a really good number. Three of them touchdowns. So they didn't have the ball a lot in this game. Now, the 3rd and 12 pass to Jeremiah Smith was big and it kicked some things off. And then they go on an 8-minute drive to start the second half and go up 14-3. And from there, you just never felt like the game was in question. They kind of took control of it there. So, yeah, I think part of it was game plan. Would you like to see them be more explosive? Sure. They have the weapons on the outside where you want to see them take more downfield shots. But I really got the sense that it was similar to the Texas game where the message to Julian was first big road test for this team, loud environment, take care of the football, don't turn it over, don't press the issue. Ohio State's just, I think Ryan Day has a lot of confidence in this defense right now. And they had a great game plan to stop Washington and limit what Damon Williams could do with his legs. And he was willing to take his time, rely on that defense, and get the road W. And I think there will be a time this year when they open it up, when they press the issue more, when they're going more downfield with the passing attack or enabling Julian to take more of those shots. I just think early in the season, they're really trying to ensure that in these key games against good opponents where there's some inexperience on this roster that they aren't making mistakes where all of a sudden you're behind on the road in this environment or you're behind against Texas, which they were behind early but really took control as the game went on. Credit to Dan who predicted that sort of play out of how it would go. But to me, I just don't have as many problems with the offensive game plan, with the offensive play calling, as I think a lot of other people did coming out of this one.
It's like Herm Edwards famously said, "You play to win the game, right?
Right.
You don't play to score a lot of points. You play to win the game." So it's like, I mean, I get it. Like, I mean, I think to some degree it comes down to the question of like, do you want to win the game or do you want it to be exciting with a lot of explosive offense and score a lot of points? Like, and that's a valid question. Like, I think there's some people who care more about seeing the explosive offense than they do about comfortably winning the game. But I think from Ryan Day's perspective, he just cares about winning the game. He cares about doing whatever he thinks gives his team the best chance to win the game. And I think in terms of Texas, in terms of Washington, I think he felt like playing ball control football was what gave them the best chance to win the game. And so, I think that, again, it's like you think if you compare it to some of those like past offenses, like, 2022 or whatever. Well, like, yeah, they had to be explosive and attack all the time on offense because their defense couldn't stop anybody. So, like, I think some of it goes back to how good they really think this defense is, that it's like they have so much confidence in their defense to get the job done that it's like they don't feel like they have to go bombs away and try to score a ton of points. They feel like they just need to not make mistakes that give the other team short fields, that put them in bad spots. And again, you mean the one turnover in this game was on special teams. And so, uh, they executed the game plan that they had. And to Andy's point, I do think we're going to see more explosive offensive displays as the season progresses. But, I don't come out of this game feeling like, oh man, like, what was wrong with the offense? I come out of this game going like, man, the defense was awesome and they did what they needed to do offensively to go win a tough road game at Washington.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so the question that maybe I think is a fair one for Ohio State in its first two drives is the number is arbitrary. It's different for every coach. It's different for every team. But I feel like the number that's kind of the default number for a coach in the scripted plays that they have is about 15, right? So drive one for Ohio State goes 9 plays, 45 yards, 4.5 minutes. They turn over on downs. Drive two, 6 plays, 15 yards, 3 minutes, 29 seconds, and then punt. So that's 15 plays right there that result in only 60 yards in around 8 minutes of action. So I do think that there is some fair concern about where Ohio State came into this game and what they thought they could achieve with its game plan coming in. Now, you do have to give credit to Ohio State for adjusting from that point forward. As soon as Ohio State gets the ball on their third possession, they go 10 plays and 73 yards in 3.5 minutes. Touchdown to Jeremiah Smith on the crossing route that Marvin Harrison Jr. made famous during his Ohio State tenure. And then from there, it was Ohio State's game on offense. They come out of halftime, they go 14 plays, 75 yards, 7.5 minutes for a touchdown. So I do have to give Brian Hartline, Ryan Day credit for, okay, their first 15 plays that maybe were a little bit conservative and they were going to rely on the defense in that time. It didn't really work, but they were able to respond in such a way that they got Jeremiah Smith involved. Julian Sand showed incredible poise in this environment. I want to talk a little bit about him just before we move on from this offensive performance. But can Julian Sand, I guess, can he handle more at the start of the game? Or should Ryan Day continue to kind of bring him along in this regard, maybe being a little bit more conservative than aggressive? I guess the question is what they're doing right now enough? What would you say to that, Andy?
Andy?
I think Andy might not have heard me. The question might have gone
Oh,
over
did you say
Andy's
Andy?
head.
I thought you said Dan. My bad. I did write about Julian after the game.
The question just went.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. I think Julian is capable of handling more, but I want to give so much credit to Julian and how he handled this road atmosphere, it being loud, navigating. It's the same thing we saw against Texas. His poise in the noise, as Ohio State said, as I put in my headline for that story. He is so composed out there and is willing to make smart decisions with the football, take the checkdowns when they're there. Like you said, 22 of 28 in this game. He had multiple throwaways. So, like that 79% completion is already great. It would have been a little higher if you exclude those throwaways, which were, some good decisions. Take care of the football, keep playing that defense. And I think the message to him was pretty similar to the Texas game of that. As I kind of talked about earlier. The other thing that really stood out to me in this game from Julian was pocket presence. Like even going back and watching the game again, there's just so many plays where Washington gets pressure, gets a guy around him or in his face, and he just has a step up in the pocket to buy that little extra time, or maybe he rolls out, gets out. Like I think the toe tap sideline catch to that Carnell had was a great example of where Julian felt the pressure, dipped out of the pocket, extends the play to his left, delivers an accurate ball that Carnell Tate makes a heck of a play on. Like those are the kinds of things that really, to me, we've talked about it many times before. The guy just doesn't look like a redshirt freshman starting for the first time. Like he has this ability to play in such a sage, experienced way that he has the look of a senior out there. The little things, the finer points of quarterbacking, the willingness to take the checkdowns, the decision making. It's all been so impressive, and especially the accuracy too. Like I think he's still leading the nation in completion percentage after this game. So he's off to a fantastic start. I think the numbers will come, like we said, as they open the offense up a little more for him. But you get through these his first big test against a top opponent, literally the number one opponent at the time, opponent in the country at the time, right? Texas was number one. First big road test in one of the loudest stadiums in the country. You get him through those two things. He's proven that you can trust him. Now it is time to let him take some more of those downfield shots. And I think he can handle all of it. He's shown he can handle all of it. And I'm excited to see where it goes from here for Julian Sand.
And there will be some tougher tests down the road for Ohio State in the regular season and then also potentially in the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State hasn't been to the Big Ten championship game since 2020, so getting there, I shouldn't say, is as much a guarantee as it used to be. But just to give a few minutes to this topic about some Big Ten opponents and some Big Ten colleagues that played on Saturday, apart from Ohio State and Washington, there were a few great games. Illinois beat USC 34-32. David Alano made a 41-yard kick as time expired. Luke Altmaier looked great in that game. There was a fun note that the Big Ten posted on social media that Luke Altmaier became the first Big Ten player since Terrell Pryor to score a passing touchdown, a rushing touchdown, and a receiving touchdown in a game, which is a cool little note from there. And that was a bounce back win for the Illini. They got blown out by Indiana 63-10, and they responded this way by beating USC. And then Indiana, they go on the road to Iowa. Kinnick Stadium is never kind to ranked opponents and was not kind to Indiana. But they did come out with a victory. It was 20-15. Fernando Mendoza was 13-22 for 230 yards, 2 scores and a pick. He did have one of the quotes of the weekend. I actually don't remember verbatim, but he was saying that he cooked some parlays with the way he performed on Saturday because Indiana was favored to win by 7.5 points in that game.
And it was because he took a safety on the very last play, because it would have been 20-13. It ended up 20-15 because he ran at the back of the end zone and took a safety to make sure there wouldn't be a defensive touchdown of some sorts.
That's definitely a quote that gained him some followers and some fans on social media, I'm sure. But then one of the games of the weekend, probably along with Georgia, Alabama, with Alabama coming out on top of Georgia, and that one was Oregon and Penn State. That was a number 3 versus number 6 matchup. Oregon comes out on top in double overtime, 30-24. Drew Aller didn't have his best performance in this game. He was 14-25 for just 137 yards. He had 2 touchdowns with 1 interception. Another note for Ohio State fans was that Jim Knowles' defense didn't record a sack or force a turnover. If that sounds familiar, that was Ohio State's performance against Oregon in the regular season last year against Oregon in Autzen. But then also James Franklin is now 4-21 in games against AP top 10 opponents. So he continues to earn his nickname as Big Game James. Dan, I want to ask you this as someone that has posted some articles to our website with some Big Ten power rankings. Coming out of this weekend, who is, in your view, Ohio State's biggest threat for a Big Ten title this season?
You got to say Oregon. I mean, the way they've looked so far this year, dominated their first 4 opponents, then going on the road, getting this win over Penn State. They do very much, in my mind, look like, I would say, not just the second best team in the Big Ten, but the second best team in the country. I think Ohio State and Oregon, from what we've seen so far this year, the polls will reflect that, are the 2 best teams in the country based on what we've seen this year. And so, you think about that potential collision course in the Big Ten championship game. That would be a really fun game. You can't discount Indiana. I mean, the way they're playing, you certainly can't discount them. But I think ahead to next week, not this upcoming weekend, but the weekend after is going to be another great weekend for Big Ten football. You're going to have Ohio State at Illinois at noon. Then you're going to have Indiana at Oregon at 3:30. Michigan to USC at night. But that Indiana at Oregon game, that's going to be a very interesting game. That'll really show us, how real is Indiana? You think back to last year, great year, but when they went to Ohio State, got blown out. We'll see. Can they have a better result this year at Oregon in that marquee regular season game? I think that'll tell us a lot about whether Indiana is, similar to what they were last year, or if they're better than what they were last year. But I do look at right now, I think Oregon's the biggest threat. Still don't discount Penn State. I mean, a double overtime loss, in this new era of college football, 1 loss does not a season make. And so there's still plenty of time for Penn State to bounce back from this. But like you said, it's the same story over and over again with Penn State. It's in these big games. They're usually competitive. It's never like they get blown out in these big games. It's just they don't find a way to win them. And and that's the whole question of Penn State. Like, I come out of that game thinking, okay, Penn State is clearly good enough to compete with the best teams in the country, but are they good enough to beat them? We'll certainly see on November 1 when they come to Ohio Stadium, can they achieve a better result? But that's just kind of a rub on Penn State right now. It's like, when it comes down to it in those big games, they don't find a way to win. So they have to do it to change that narrative. But certainly they're still in that conversation. But, when I look at it right now, I mean, if I was projecting the Big Ten championship game right now, I'd be projecting a collision course between Ohio State and Oregon.
Andy, let me ask you, so I'm assuming that you would also say Oregon, unless you're like slamming your fist on the table. You're like, Minnesota is the second best team. If you're not picking Oregon, which of those 2 teams, Indiana and Penn State, is then the next biggest threat for Ohio State? Could you see a potential Big Ten championship matchup between Ohio State and either of those 2 teams?
It's a very interesting question, and they play each other, so we'll get some on-field evidence of that, and I think that could even be a key. Like if Penn State, if Ohio State beats Penn State going into that game, that could be a, does Penn State get in the playoff at 9-3 with no big wins? Like, that could be a really
I
interesting
think they
thing.
have to win. They have to win one of those two games because their non-conference schedule was nothing. So I
Exactly.
would say I think they have to beat either Ohio State or Indiana to make the CFP.
Yeah, they are one of
Yeah,
two teams currently, them in Texas, that do not have a Power 5 win through their first 4 games. Just want to point that out before Andy continues.
I'm pretty
with his
confident
answer.
UCLA doesn't either. I assume you mean among
top 25. Yeah.
among top
Sorry,
25.
of the two teams that are considered contenders for the college football playoff, I don't think UCLA is a contender at 0-3.
Hey,
or
you never know.
maybe.
They could run the table, go 8-1 in conference play. You never know.
Yeah. That was me saying one of the graphics,
I
like
know,
when
that
Joe
ain't gonna
Thomas
happen.
shows up with the first NFL offensive lineman.
So going back to the original question, bigger threat to Ohio State specifically, I might take Indiana just because of I think the same psychological hurdle that Ohio State seems to have with Michigan right now, which is a discussion for way down the line with this team, and as we get closer to Michigan week, is a similar mental hurdle that Penn State has with Ohio State. I mean, they just something about them. They don't like, especially that game being in Columbus this year. And if Ohio State wins that game, it's going to effectively eliminate Penn State from the Big Ten championship discussion because Ohio State, like they'd have 2 Big Ten losses and they'd lose the tiebreaker with Ohio State probably at that point. If Ohio State somehow lost 2 other Big Ten games, I don't know. Like that doesn't seem really feasible, but um, so to me, because they don't play Indiana and they could get into the Big Ten championship, especially if they beat Penn State and especially if they beat both Penn State and Oregon, right? Um, I think Kurt Cignetti's program kind of has like that mentality of they're not going to be scared of anybody. They are probably have some, feel some type of way about getting blown out in the shoe last year. And I just think for me, I view Indiana as more of a threat because right now I don't see Penn State winning that game in the shoe later this year with, it's just at some point a pattern's a pattern. I've never been really one to say that a coach is incapable of winning big games, but it just seemed like big game James. It's just these patterns that show up, these questionable calls that always happen, every time they play Ohio State, it's like they've been Ohio State's come back from huge 18-point deficits and multi-score deficits in the fourth quarter of games against Penn State multiple times in the James Franklin era. They like you think back to 2018, running the ball on 4th and 5 instead of putting it in Trace McSorley's hands when he'd been the killer all game. Like there's just always something that goes awry. And last year it was like Penn State started 0 for 12 on 3rd down, and Drew Aller had an awful performance. And I there's a mental hurdle with Penn State, I feel like, to where Penn State might be the better team talent wise than Indiana. I still think they have a ridiculously talented roster, on defense and at running back, and they have a strong offensive line. But in terms of a threat to Ohio State, I honestly view Indiana as more of one than I do Penn State, though I would easily pick Ohio State in either of the when playing either of those teams.
Well, as we come to a close here, let's move to some of our fan questions. We had a few that were submitted into our forum beforehand. One that Dan and I were talking about off air. I want to get to him on this. Dan, where the heck is the quarterback sneak? When Ohio State's in these 4th and short situations, we had a couple of these questions from our forum. Why isn't Ohio State electing to run a quarterback sneak? And do you think that's still something that they could incorporate into their offense, or maybe is that just not the personnel that they have to be running that kind of play in 4th and short situations or 3rd?
Yeah, I mean that first 4th down where CJ Donaldson got stopped. Like when I was looking down from the press box, I was looking around my TVs in my way. I was thinking like this would be a good spot for a quarterback sneak. Like it, and I think the reason why is because Julian had just run the ball on the previous play. He'd almost run for a 1st down. He got ruled just short. And I not directly answering the question, but we haven't talked about it yet. But I do want to make that point, like going back to Julian saying, like the number one thing that impressed me about Julian saying was seeing him make some of those plays of his legs, because I've nitpicked him for that on this show before about that being the one thing I'm not sure about with Julian is like, what can he do as a runner? To see him in a few situations in this game, see the open field, scramble for yards, didn't necessarily get first downs, but got some key yardages. Like on Jaden Fielding's field goal, I think he got 12 yards. He turns a 45-yard field goal into one that was much more makeable. So I think Julian showing that with his legs, that kind of does have me thinking like, maybe they do work the quarterback sneak in here. Now, I do think that Ryan Day is probably less inclined to call a quarterback sneak for Julian Sayin than he was with Will Howard, simply because Will Howard was 4 or 5 inches taller and 30 pounds bigger. I don't know the exact difference off the top of my head, but does Ryan Day really want to call a play that has Julian Sayin ramming into 300-pound defensive tackles? I'm not sure that he does. So I don't know how much we're going to see of a quarterback sneak this year, but I do think that it was a big step in the right direction to see Julian make a few plays with his legs. And while I don't think that Ryan Day particularly wants Julian Sayin running the ball a lot, much like was the case with CJ Stroud, it is important for him to be able to get those yards when there's nothing but green grass and you can go get 10 yards to put your offense in a better situation. Those are the plays that Julian Sayin does need to be able to make with his legs, and he showed that he could do that against Washington, which I think was a big step forward for him.
It seemed to give him a little bit of confidence.
I wanted to add one thing real quick too. I'm sorry, Chase, not to cut you off, but
go ahead,
just real quick. I am like a couple of years ago, I was one of the people that said sneak the damn rock. Like the quarterback sneak isn't the same guarantee that it was a decade ago. Like
unless you're the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, unless you're the Philadelphia, right? The tush push, right? And that's because they brought in rugby coaches to specifically practice that play and refine it and do it better than everybody else, which is why I'm against it being banned. But that's besides the case. I look how many times has Ohio State stopped a quarterback sneak on a key fourth down the last 2 years? It's been several. It happened in the Texas game earlier this season, and that's with a quarterback in Arch Manning who's much better with his legs, much bigger, much stronger than Julian Sayin running the football. Like, it isn't some guarantee like just sneak the rock, you're going to get the yard. It happens all the time that those plays get stuffed these days. It's very predictable. Defenses know what to do against it. You root hog, you plug the A gaps, you funnel it down. So to me, like saying why isn't Ohio State sneaking? It's exactly what Dan said. You have a small quarterback. It's a lot harder to execute than I think people give it credit for, and to just like fall forward for that yard when you've got 300-pound guys that are diving under you and pushing the pile backwards. It's not an easy thing to do. I really just want to emphasize how hard it's gotten relative to the past to just sneak a rock and get a yard for a first down.
I think we have a comment from friend of the program, Bill Landis on YouTube, who said, unless you're the birds, Anders, unless you're the birds, getting those third and short, fourth and short situations with the tush push. And I do think to add on just one more point, I think Julian Sayin's ability to run the football also gave him a bit of confidence when he was in those kind of jailbreak scenarios. The play that Andy mentioned earlier, his pass to Carnell Tate, that started because Julian Sayin escaped the pocket, gave a ball fake that pretty much sent the Washington defense into disarray. They didn't think that Julian Sayin was capable of such a move. He scrambles then to his left and delivers a strike to Carnell Tate. So just the simple threat of Julian Sayin being able to run the football, I think is kind of expanding his vision of the field. It's also giving this offense another threat. Particularly when they get into those red zone situations and the short field comes into play, you're not able to run as freely with some of the talented receivers that Ohio State has. Dan, I want to ask your thoughts on this question as well. We have one from our forum, which is asking about the special teams. The question is whether there seems to be lingering issues since the Parker Fleming firing. Do we need someone, Ohio State, do they need someone to focus on that duty and maybe figure out how to get our cannon leg punter hitting the ball consistently?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly room for improvement on special teams. I mean, you look at this past game, certainly, the punt return, fumble comes to mind. I thought, there were some good moments in kickoff coverage, Aaron Scott in particular having 2 tackles inside the 20-yard line. But I think, the punt game certainly leaves something to be desired. I don't think it's been a great first month of a season for Joe McGuire. And so I do think that, again, I don't know if Nick McLarty's continuing to push him, but I do think that there's certainly room to grow in terms of that punt game, punt return game. I mean, it's like, you look at it, it's like, if not for the fumble, that would have been Brandon Innis's best punt return of a season. And it's like they took a step forward, but it ends up a fumble. So, I think punt and punt return in particular are two areas you look at and say, they should be getting a little bit more out of this. I mean, the amount of athletes they have on the team, like there should be, the punt return game should be better than it's been. I think it's pretty obvious the kickoff return, like they're not really super interested in returning a lot of kickoffs. Like they did mix some different guys back in there. Like they had Bo Jackson back there, which I think made more sense than having James Peoples back there. They had Lorenzo Styles Jr. back there. So maybe they're trying to set something up for like a bigger game to use the kickoff return more, but it does feel like pretty much several years now, dating back even before Parker Fleming, it's kind of been like kickoff returns. They're more just like, we're just going to fair catch it for the most part. But I do think punt and punt return in particular, you'd like to see a little bit more out of that. And it is an interesting question that, they have Rob Keys, who is leading the special teams efforts, but he's not a full-time coach. He is a full-time coach in terms of like, that's kind of a outdated moniker. Like he's there 40 hours a week, but he's not a true position coach. He's not being paid like a true position coach. So it is interesting that Ohio State has taken that approach in terms of it kind of on the surface seems like de-emphasizing it a little bit. Now, at the same time, when it's Parker Fleming, one of the comments I heard all the time is, why is one of our 10 coaches a special teams coach? So it's like, I don't know if you can really win there. It's like one way or the other. It's going to be like, oh, we're wasting a spot on a special teams coach, or why don't we have a special teams coach? Ultimately, you have better results on the field. People aren't going to question your approach there. But I don't know if I could say like one approach there is necessarily better than the other, but certainly you're looking for areas of improvement for this team coming out of the first month. I think special teams is certainly one of those on that list.
And Andy, let's get out of here on this one. As someone that wrote our 5 things to know about Minnesota, I had a question again from our forum. What do Ohio State fans need to know about Minnesota? That PJ Fleck seemed pretty confident about his team being able to make a push for the college football playoff this season, but they did have that upset loss to Cal, escaped against Rutgers. So the question is, what is kind of your primary takeaway about this Minnesota football team, and what can Ohio State fans expect from this matchup on Saturday?
Yeah, PJ Fleck's always going to be really confident in his team. That's kind of part of his whole thing, his whole shtick. So like they had a really good win, really good bounce back win last week against Rutgers, obviously. Drake Lindsey had a really good breakout performance in that game with 31 of 41 for 324 yards, I believe it was, off the top of my head. It's in 5 Things to Know if you want to read that and dive into what all is out there about Minnesota. Their defense has been strong this year. Rutgers and Cal did have some success in the passing game, but the run defense in particular is one of the top 10 in the country. They're top 10 in total defense. So this is a defense with a lot of weapons and a lot of versatility at safety when you talk about Coy Parrish and what he's done. Guy Ohio State really went after on the recruiting trail late, got him on campus for an official visit right before he signed with Minnesota last December. Had a breakout freshman season, was first team All Big Ten as a freshman, which is a pretty rare feat to accomplish there. So they do a lot of versatile things with him. They've got 2 really good linebackers that can play run, play pass. They've got some good guys up front. It's a defense that drives the team. It's a young blossoming quarterback similar to Ohio State. Overall, though, talent to talent, I don't really see them competing with Ohio State in this game. When you look at Rutgers and kind of that matchup and how even those teams were, you even look at the yardage numbers and how that game played out statistically, like they're on the Rutgers level in terms of like firmly a mid-tier Big Ten team, I feel like. And Rutgers, I don't think, is a team that would hang with Ohio State this year. I don't think Minnesota is either. This defense is smothering much better offenses than Minnesota has, even with how Drake Lindsey played this last game. So I don't expect it to be a particularly close one, but surprises can happen any given Saturday, I suppose.
There's a great comment in our YouTube chat that say that all they know about Minnesota is that Prince stayed there. I think that's a great thing to end this episode on, was that Prince remained in Minneapolis. Guys, this has been another great episode. I enjoyed this conversation with you both, as I always do, and want to make everyone aware that our next episode of 11 Warriors Live will be back on a regularly scheduled programming on Sunday following Ohio State's matchup with Minnesota. It will be a 7:30 kickoff on NBC. We got another night kickoff for an Ohio State home game, which is something I don't think many fans were expecting, but we'll have it. Want to turn your attention again to the 11 Dubgate being this weekend. I believe Ohio State is undefeated when we have hosted the 11 Dubgate, so expect another Ohio State win on Saturday. We'll be behind the Varsity Club a few hours before kickoff. And also want to give another shout out to First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors. Visit them at fohio.com. I've been Chase Brown, joined by Dan, and we will see you soon.